Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion with Ralf Matthaes, long-term board member of CanChem and the managing director of InFocus Consultants, a brand market entry consultancy. Welcome back, Ralf.
Thank you.
So, in broad strokes, could you maybe first describe the process of setting up shop in Vietnam? What insight could you give us for that?
Right, well, 20 years ago it was very difficult, so let's not talk about that, but
Right.
let's talk about today.
Yeah.
The Vietnamese government has done an awful lot of good things to try and create one-stop shop in terms of establishing business here. Step one is to make sure that you have all your appropriate documentation, so whether that be your company charter, your financials, business plan, so on and so forth. Then your next step would be to go to the DPI, which is the Department of Investment and Planning, whether that be up in Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City or wherever else you plan to operate. Then you would go and seek an audience with them. They will tell you exactly what is required. All right. The one pointer I can give you that most people don't know, it's very important that you establish very clearly what the benefit to Vietnam is of your operation here, whether it be export or for the domestic economy or whatever else. Another good pointer is typically, if you have all your documentation together, it shouldn't take more than 3 months to receive your license, okay? As long as you have all your documentation together and that whatever industry or sector that you're in is not a limited sector, because there are certain sectors like mining and whatnot and so on and so forth that do have limitations to investment. What's good is if you can get all your documentation in latest October, November, you'll get your license very quickly because the government wants to ensure that they hit their FDI numbers, their foreign direct investment numbers, by the end of the year.
Okay.
So they will fast track applications so that they can count the FDI in terms of your capital expenditure into their budgets for that year. So that's a helpful pointer.
Are companies allowed to actually operate during the application process, or do you have to sit on your thumbs and wait for the 3 months? Or
Look, it's different in every other country. I mean, in Cambodia, or even in Myanmar, you can, based on the principle that yes, you will receive your license. In Vietnam, we did operate initially without the license, but then that was only as a rep office, which means that everything, all billing invoices is done from overseas. That's okay, all right, as long as you abide by the laws that exist for a rep office and whatnot, okay? So yes, you can, but you know, realistically, if you're here for the long haul, what's 3 months matter?
yeah.
You know, I would strongly urge anybody and everybody to try and respect and follow the laws of this country, because that just puts you in a good place for the future.
Is the process advancing further? Is it getting easier? Is there
Much easier. When we first started, the whole process took over 1.5 years. And it's just because, to be fair, the government really had no understanding of the type of interest that opening up Vietnam back in '93 or whatever else would generate.
Yes.
Today, they have made it much easier. There is one point of contact. Based on what country your investment sits, you will be directed to a specific person or department within the DPI. Now, if you happen to be in certain sectors which are deemed protected, it can take a lot longer. And again, there are certain ones. Say even in pharmaceutical or healthcare, because of the licensing of product, licensing of medicines and whatever else, there's a lot more involved. Okay, but if you're a service company or if you're looking to export, very quick. very quick. Seriously, not longer than 3 months if you have all your documentation.
Are there any specific or obvious challenges that companies would be running into to set up shop in Vietnam? Anything that really stands out?
Well, to be honest with you, the process is not difficult.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just I think people have to be careful. They come in here, have a look around, they meet someone who says, "Oh yes, I can help you," blah 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 blah. Vietnam is a country of middlemen.
Right.
Okay, so be very careful of who you initially start to deal with, because you don't know what their actual contacts are. Yeah. I would urge anybody, if you want to enter, go to a lawyer, go to a KPMG, Baker McKenzie, to have them guide you. It doesn't cost that much, like the licensing process, probably about $10,000 for them to guide you through all of that, and then eventually that, you'll wind up at the DPI anyways to get that done. It's the simplest way where you're not going to be sidetracked or curtailed by facilitators, because every second person in Vietnam is a supposed facilitator with strong government connections, which typically is not the case.
Okay. So overall, how do you, we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but overall, how do you see Vietnam comparing to other countries in the region?
Well, we have the TTP coming up in 2015. That is the sort of free trade pact across most of the Asian countries. If this comes across, Vietnam will benefit greatly, whether it be from textiles, agricultural products, so on and so forth. What's really interesting, if you take a look today, Vietnam's economy is in a bit of a slump, okay? And what I mean by that, the domestic economy has grown exponentially over the last 15 years, where, yes, you see GDP figures at 5-6% growth, back then 8-9%, but what was happening was domestic spend in terms of consumerism was just growing at 10, 20, 30%. Because of inflation, that spend has now reduced, and the growth of, say, FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods, and wherever else has really slowed. So what's actually happened is it is the export market, number one, that is fueling the economy, all right? And number two, what we're seeing is a huge increase in FDI. Now, FDI as a whole is about $10-12 billion, okay, which is actually quite a reasonable figure for a $150 billion economy. But what we're seeing is the FDI flow is not so much into new projects, but what we're seeing is a huge level of investment into funds and equity companies. So in other words, a lot of global investors are taking Vietnam very seriously now. For example, Vietnam's stock market last year grew by 20%, but that's also because it had a couple of very rough years. So exports are fueling Vietnam's positive growth. The foreign direct investment into a lot of funds and venture capitalist companies is another one that's fueling. So those are some of the positives that we're seeing in Vietnam today. Some of the negatives are still bad debt. There's still a high level of bad debt out there, which the government is trying to deal with. Supposedly how they're trying to deal with that is by getting the banks who actually help fuel all the speculation and whatever else in bad debt, is getting them to take a hit of 5% a year off their profitability to pay back the bad debt. As I said, the domestic economy is not doing that well, all right, in terms of actual growth. And the big one is real estate. Real estate has been very flat, but we've only started to see twinklings of that development. On another note, another positive is infrastructure development. Even though the domestic economy is not doing that well, the level of investment that the government is putting in terms of the subway and bridges and ports is phenomenal. Yeah. So that sort of leads to probably the next question is about sectors.
Yep.
Yeah. So if we look at sectors that are doing well here, construction materials, oil and gas is doing very well. They've just found another huge batch of natural gas and whatever else, which is again being contested. That's doing very well. Education has continually done well. The level of spend on education is phenomenal for a country of this ilk. And healthcare continues to do well. So, you know, right there's four sectors alone that are doing very well. The other one, as I said, is exports. Now, exports is not a sector, okay, but if you take a look at the investment that Samsung has made here in terms of their phones and devices and whatever else, huge levels. If you take a look at things like agri-product, seed product, shoes, clothing, textiles, these are all really growing well. So there is still huge opportunity, but I would say the most positive is that how shall I say, the garbage speculation that was fueled in about 2003, 2004 with the advent of WTO, Vietnam joining WTO, created this huge speculative bubble which burst in 2010, 2011. All that crap is out. So actually, what you're seeing today is actually a genuine, real market capital economy, which is based on pretty fierce competition, very sensitive price points, yeah, and how shall I say, but still with huge growth opportunity. I'll give you an example. If I look at market research, up until recently, I took care of Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar, and Vietnam. And if you look at an economy like Thailand, okay, Thailand, 60 million people, I think its overall GDP is $4,500 per head per month. Vietnam is more like $1,700 a month. If you look at market research spend for 90 million people in Vietnam, it's about 60 million. If you look at Thailand, for 60 million people, it's 170 million. So it just shows you the huge potential of growth still. But the point is, it's now competitive growth. Right. While before it was build them, they will come, you know, and this is a perfect example. Here's the real estate market and the retail market. Everything was geared towards high income levels, and they completely missed the boat on what people need here. So my advice, and I think this is one of the key things that will come out of this interview, to be successful in Vietnam, you have to do your homework first. You have to really understand the market, understand the size of the opportunity, understand the gap in the market, and understand whether your product or service can actually succeed in this market. In the old days, people would just build and it would fill up. That's no longer the case because of the huge growth. For example, I think we now have a substantial surplus when it comes to office space. So rents have dropped like no tomorrow. I think 2008's A-grade commercial office space was almost at $90 per square meter. That same commercial space is now about $35 per square meter. So it almost dropped back to where it was, say in 2004. Yeah. So you have to understand the not Keynesian economics. You have to understand the whole supply and demand, who your competitors are, and most importantly, what the Vietnamese want. Because it's not about what you have to offer. It's about linking what you have to what the need in the market is.
So here's a question for you that the answer is probably in what you've already talked about, but specifically for Canadian companies. What Canadian industries do well, could do well in Vietnam?
Well, look, if we, the Canadian government has sort of woken up to the fact that you cannot have 80% of your trade with the U.S. and expect to stay dominant. So I think there's been a genuine shift in the last couple of years where Canada is really looking to emerging markets to begin to have a stronger presence within the emerging markets, whether that be Vietnam or Turkey or Central America or wherever. And I know that for Vietnam, the Canadian government has sort of highlighted, I believe it's 5 specific sectors. So education, ITC, mining, and the whole agri-business, forest, so on and so forth. So I think there in itself are great opportunities. For myself, from what I see, Canada has a lot of project management skills. So I think there's great opportunity for companies who are in that project management space. I know that, for the last 20 years it's all been about outsourcing, and now America's sort of moving back towards insourcing. Well, when you think about the average salary for a factory worker here is about $120, $130 a month. Driving an export-based business out of here still makes a huge amount of sense. Yeah. The other one, as I said, I think infrastructure development. Canada is very good at whether it be roads, highways, ports, airports, so on and so forth. These are areas that Canada has a real advantage, so I think those are areas that Canada can do well. But I think the big one is on agri-products, and whether that be animal husbandry, whether that be insecticides, pesticides, fertilizers, so on and so forth. The Vietnam government has really underinvested in agriculture, and they've sort of taken their eye off the ball a little bit because they're really looking for manufacturing industrial growth. But when you think of the global reputation advantage that Canada has, I think there is a real opportunity there which is not being met at this point in time.
Okay. Last question for you. How do you see Vietnam's future in the next year, 5 years, 10 years?
I think Vietnam has had 3 stages. Sort of 1990 to about 2001, which was the opening of the country stage. Okay. 2001 to about 2010, which was the organic growth development stage of Vietnam. And now, and I would say literally as of this year or last year, Vietnam is now where I would consider it to be the genuine market capital stage of its development, where it's about fierce competition, where it's about price points, where it is really about understanding consumer need and gap and opportunity. And this is a stage that I think Vietnam will be in for quite some time, because this is really, when you're becoming developed, this is where you are. And a big part of it, of the success for Vietnam, is going to have to be about the government still opening up some of the protected sectors that are there. The one thing that we not talk about, but is very important, is Vietnam's lack of white-collar skilled human capital. Obviously with all the education institutions coming up and whatever else, it's getting better, but there's still a long way to go there. So these are some of the things that have to be addressed for Vietnam to do better. But having said that, because Vietnamese have a very entrepreneurial spirit, and again, if you take a look at the GDP, there's huge opportunity for growth still. But Vietnam is the type of place that if you want to be successful, don't expect very quick returns and don't expect it to be easy. It's a tough slog, it's difficult. But, I started TNS back in '96, and I went from first year revenue $250,000 to this year being in the double digits, in the millions, so the opportunity for someone who's got a long-term strategy and vision is absolutely there. So I would say Vietnam's on the right path. I think with TTP coming on, that's another huge opportunity or advantage for Vietnam moving forward. And I think the other thing I would note that Vietnam does have a hard-working workforce, but it needs to get a more professional, experienced workforce.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Ralf.
Okay, welcome, sir.
Absolute privilege to have you with us today. Ralf Matthaes, Managing Director of InFocus Consultants. We look forward to seeing you again next time.